Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Today is explanation of Renegade Immortal episode number 58 based on novel. So let's start. The sky was getting dark, and by the time the large-eared cultivator and the little cultivator arrived at Wang Lin's shop, it was already dark. However, there were lights coming from the sides of the street. Xu Dao woke up in a haze. After hesitating for a while, he quickly got a bearing of his surroundings and got up. When he saw Wang Lin, he immediately knelt on the ground with an excited expression on his face, unable to say a word. Wang Lin's expression remained the same. He didn't even look at Xu Dao as he said, "I saved your life to repay your 16 years of commitment. You can leave." Xu Dao hesitated for a bit before kowtowing a few more times and whispering, "Thank you for your kindness. I'll remember it forever." With that, he took a deep breath, stood up, and opened the door to leave. Just at that moment, Wang Lin frowned and said, "Xu Dao, come back. Also, don't bother closing the door." Xu Dao's body shook as he quickly came back and looked at Wang Lin with a confused expression. Wang Lin took a sip of the wine in his hand and plainly said, "Stand to the side. We have guests." Xu Dao's expression slightly changed as he stood next to Wang Lin. His eyes trembled as he looked at the door. Shortly after, one could hear soft footsteps closing in. Soon, a large-eared cultivator walked in along with the little cultivator that Wang Lin had let go earlier. Xu Dao immediately revealed a look of terror. He was able to immediately recognize that the large-eared cultivator was the one forcing the king to hide inside the palace. His heart was immediately in chaos, but after looking at Wang Lin, he forced himself from taking a step back. After the little cultivator entered the shop, he immediately laughed and shouted, "Master, it is him who injured me." The little cultivator turned around and was surprised to find that his master wasn't looking at the person, but at the wood carvings surrounding them. Wang Lin still hadn't talked. He was casually drinking wine. He only looked at the two of them once before withdrawing his gaze. The large-eared cultivator carefully looked at each wood carving before his attention suddenly focused on two carvings. These two carvings were the middle-aged man and old woman from the White Cloud sect. The large-eared cultivator looked for a long time, then let out a smile. He didn't behave like a stranger at all. He waved his sleeve and sat across from Wang Lin. "Fellow cultivator, how about letting me have a drink?" The large-eared cultivator gently took out a cup. Wang Lin looked at the person and threw the jug of wine forward. The large-eared cultivator caught the jug and poured a cup. When he drank it, his eyes revealed a strange light and he said, "Delicious." Wang Lin chuckled, "Since you like it, then I'll gift you the rest of that jug." The large-eared cultivator let out a laugh. He didn't refuse the gift. He poured himself another cup and drank it. After a long time, he let out a sigh and said, "Fellow cultivator's cultivation level is higher than mine. Using the mortal world to turn into a mortal, I admire you." Wang Lin waved his right hand and a jug of wine appeared in his grasp. He took a drink and said, "Fellow cultivator is using your disciple to turn into a mortal by using the emotion of a teacher and parent to comprehend the heavens. The result is the same as mine, so there is no need to admire." The strange light in the large-eared cultivator's eyes deepened as he looked at Wang Lin. He nodded and said, "It seems I was not mistaken. After hearing from my disciple, I guessed that there was someone else who was at the same realm as me, someone else attempting to reach the soul formation stage in the capital." Wang Lin silently smiled. The large-eared cultivator faintly smiled. "Fellow cultivator, how about we have a competition and see which one of us will reach the mythical soul formation stage first?" he asked. Wang Lin faintly smiled at the large-eared cultivator and said, "If I gain a sense of competition in my heart, I'm afraid that I'll never reach the soul formation stage in my life." "Fellow cultivator, your words are very vicious." The large-eared cultivator let out a laugh as he waved his sleeves and clasped his hands. He said, "I didn't expect to meet a cultivator of your caliber here. Good. My name is Ju Wutai. What should I call you?" Wang Lin picked up the jug of wine, took a drink, and said, "Wang Lin." Ju Wutai smiled and said, "Fellow cultivator Wang, you will definitely reach the soul formation stage within 100 years. I will congratulate you early today." Wang Lin's expression was calm as he said, "Fellow cultivator Ju is speaking prematurely. From my point of view, whether fellow cultivator Ju can reach the soul formation stage is uncertain, but that disciple of yours will definitely die within 100 years. Ju Wutai's eyes lit up, but he remained silent. The little cultivator wanted to give Wang Lin a vicious look, but seeing that his master seemed very familiar with him, he suppressed his anger. He let out a snort and thought that Wang Lin really didn't know any better. This was the first time he had seen his master talk like this to anyone. On top of that, Not only was this person not grateful, he even spoke such vicious words. Even Xu Dao felt that Wang Lin's words were a bit too much. He became even more cautious, afraid that the large-eared cultivator would become enraged. But what surprised him was that after the large-eared cultivator finished pondering, not only did the large-eared cultivator not get mad, he displayed a bitter smile. With the little cultivator's cultivation level, he wasn't able to notice the battle between the large-eared cultivator and Wang Lin. As for Xu Dao, he was only a mortal, so there was no way he could feel how dangerous this exchange was. Although the large-eared cultivator seemed gentle ever since he entered, his intent was evil the entire time. Every word he had spoken and every action he had taken were filled with ill intent. Originally, he wanted to stir Wang Lin's competitive side. If he had succeeded, then he wouldn't have to ever bother with Wang Lin anymore because, in order to reach the soul formation stage, one must turn into a mortal to comprehend the heavens, which requires a calm heart. Once Wang Lin's heart becomes competitive, then he will be stuck and will never reach the soul formation stage. Even if Wang Lin one day manages to get rid of this blockade, it would be countless years later. This showed just how devious the large-eared cultivator was. Although his plan was foiled by Wang Lin, the large-eared cultivator didn't give up. He continued to congratulate Wang Lin on succeeding within 100 years. This was yet another trap for Wang Lin. Although the old man from before said the same thing, it was very different from when the large-eared cultivator said it. The old man was at a much higher cultivation level and the Wang Lin back then wasn't at an important bottleneck. So instead of creating a mental block for Wang Lin, it boosted his confidence. The difference was that now these words came from the large-eared cultivator. Although they were the same words, the meaning was completely different. If Wang Lin really took it to heart, then as the years pass and he doesn't reach the soul formation stage within 100 years, he will never have another chance unless he gains a sudden enlightenment to get rid of the curse in his heart. Seeing that the large-eared cultivator kept trying to attack him, Wang Lin finally retaliated. He first said that whether the large-eared cultivator will reach the soul formation in 100 years was uncertain. This was a slightly modified version of what the large-eared cultivator said, but the result was the same. However, this wasn't the important part of Wang Lin's retaliation. His final sentence was the real retaliation. Within 100 years, that little cultivator will definitely die. This one sentence pointed out the basis of the large-eared cultivators and the little cultivator's master-disciple relationship. The large-eared cultivator, Ju Wutai, was turning into a mortal by comprehending the relationship of master and disciple. Using this desire to move his thoughts, he accepted a disciple. He would use love to educate a son, kindness to give him favor, his heart to love him, and the tragedy of losing his disciple to enter the soul formation stage. Everything that the large-eared cultivator had done so far was for the sake of this master-disciple relationship. When he finally feels his own domain and is about to enter the soul formation stage, that is the day when he will act and personally kill his disciple. He must kill the disciple that he had poured his heart into and then use the sadness from it to finally enter the soul formation stage. His path appeared to be filled with emotion, but was ruthless, yet within that ruthlessness, there was emotion. This method was not something a normal person could go through with. At least it not something Wang Lin could do. That's why his last sentence was the real counterattack. First of all, it stated that the disciple will die within 100 years, which brought up the 100-year time limit again. Secondly, it exposed the true ruthless nature of the large-eared cultivator and brought up the sadness that he will feel in the future. At the same time, he also left a faint mark in the little cultivator's heart. The large-eared cultivator, Ju Wutai, bitterly smiled as he looked at Wang Lin and stood up. He clasped his hands, then hesitated for a bit before saying to Xu Dao, "Tell your king to deliver the item to the temple within 3 days and I'll let this go." With that, he looked at Wang Lin once more before turning around to leave. The little cultivator was completely startled and quickly followed his master. He felt like today was extremely weird because master didn't act like normal and didn't get revenge for him. At the same time, he couldn't help but think of Wang Lin's words, that he will die within 100 years. Thinking about it, he couldn't help but shiver. When he raised his head, he saw his master gently looking at him and his heart couldn't help but feel warm. There is no need to think about it so much. Why did you put the candy away and not eat it? The large-eared cultivator's voice was gentle and filled with reassurance. The little cultivator's eyes became red as he answered, "Disciple has decided to keep it forever." The large-eared cultivator smiled as he rubbed the little cultivator's head. He silently smiled as he led the little cultivator and they walked out of Wang Lin's street. Wang Lin sat inside the shop. He was lost in thought. After a long time, He let out a smile and decided not to think about it too much, or else it would mess with him as he approaches the end of the road of turning into a mortal. At the moment, Xu Dao was completely frozen. Originally, he just thought that Wang Lin was an expert. How could the wood carvings he had made cause the two immortals in the palace to be so shocked otherwise? He then carefully observed and found that Wang Lin's shop didn't have anything happen to it. The two immortals became silent and never talked about the carvings again. Even His Royal Highness had ordered him to gift Wang Lin during the New Year every year. Because he had done it for more than 10 years, when he was met with danger, the first person he thought of was Wang Lin. But he never would have imagined that Wang Lin was powerful enough to force the person who forced the king to hide inside palace and the immortals to not dare to come forth to give up so easily. It has to be said that a few days ago, His Highness wished he could have handed over the rain ding to save his life. After Xu Dao left, Wang Lin's life calmed down again. It was as if what had happened passed by like the clouds. Once they leave, they don't come back. Wang Lin still got up early every day and opened up his shop door to wait for Dianyo's son to bring him a jug of wine. He would then sit there and carve while drinking. He had lived like this for many years and this lifestyle had been carved into his bones. He was far from the road of killing. It was like the him from before and the him now were two completely different people. He no longer had any killing intent around him. Instead, he emitted a calm aura, a mortal existence. Wang Lin didn't know what the domain he will comprehend will be, but he wasn't in a rush as he calmly comprehended the heavens. 7 days after Xu Dao left, he came back with a middle-aged man who had the look of royalty on his face. This person respectfully came into the shop with Xu Dao. Not caring about his status, he knelt down and kowtowed 3 times. Wang Lin's eyes scanned the person, but he didn't say anything. He could easily tell that this person was Xu Dao's superior, which meant that this was the highness the large-eared cultivator was after. In the eyes of a normal mortal, His Highness was someone high above them, but in Wang Lin's eyes, this person was like an ant. Although this person had some cultivation, if he couldn't reach the foundation establishment stage, then he won't escape the cycle of life and death. The middle-aged man seemed to already know of Wang Lin's temper. After he finished kowtowing, he took out a bag of holding and respectfully placed it on the table. Then, he and Xu Dao respectfully left. Wang Lin still hadn't said a single word. It wasn't until after they left that Wang Lin raised his head. He picked up the bag and scanned it with his divine sense to find a large amount of spirit stones inside. He casually threw the bag to the side of the shop, then took a deep breath and walked out of the shop. He sat on a chair outside and looked at the blue sky and white clouds while enjoying the sun. He couldn't help closing his eyes as he really enjoyed this life. If his parents were still alive and they were together in this shop, then he wouldn't have any regrets left in this life. Time quickly went by and another 5 years passed. On this day, Dianyo's father finally couldn't escape the cycle of life and death any longer. The ironworks shop was closed. There were white flags outside the shop and waves of crying could be heard from inside. Wang Lin stood outside his own shop as he stared at the ironworks shop. He couldn't help but remember the scene from 20 years ago where that hearty young man invited him to their home for dinner. Wang Lin also couldn't forget that because this hearty young man wanted to expand his shop, he came to him and rather awkwardly asked for money to borrow. In these 20-plus years, Wang Lin couldn't even remember how many times he had eaten at their home. But life and death was not something Wang Lin could change. Growing old and dying of old age was part of his comprehension of the heavens. Even if he used some heaven-defying method to extend Dianyo's father's life, it would only be a few years before he was eventually taken by the cycle. Not only that, but because of it, his soul would become inferior inside the life and death cycle. After all, Dianyo's soul was very different from Wang Zhuo's. Wang Zhuo was a cultivator, which was already a heaven-defying path. This allowed Wang Lin to take his soul and insert it into a pregnant woman. But he couldn't do it for Dianyo's father. Wang Lin stood before his own shop and let out a sigh. A flower with black petals suddenly appeared in his hand. This was not a normal flower, but an ingredient for the spirit-expelling pill. If a mortal has just died and their soul hasn't completely dispersed yet, then this flower can cause their soul to become more intact and have more soul power. This allows them a better chance to get a good family inside the soul river. Wang Lin slowly walked toward the ironworks shop. Inside the shop, various aunts and uncles of Dianyo were mourning. A depressing atmosphere filled the shop. Dianyo's father lied peacefully inside his coffin in the backyard of the shop. Dianyo and his wife were next to the coffin. Dianyo's eyes were red. It was obvious that he was just crying. On the side stood another woman. She was Dianyo's mother. Her heart was also filled with sadness as she looked at her husband inside the coffin with eyes filled with despair. Wang Lin already realized more than 20 years ago that the relationship between this couple was very deep. The moment Wang Lin entered, everyone revealed a look of respect. In this street, Wang Lin was very well known. After Daenyo's mother saw Wang Lin, she gently nodded, knelt down, and whispered, "Widow Seng Sai greets big brother Wang." Wang Lin let out a sigh and went forward to get her up. Then, he received incense from someone nearby. After he lit it up, he paid his respects. The moment he paid his respects, the sky darkened. However, this kind of darkening was something mortals couldn't see. Black smoke appeared above Daenyo's father's body. It gathered until it finally formed the shape of Daenyo's father. He hugged his body as if he was very cold and his face was pale. It was as if he could disappear at any time. He looked around confusedly until his gaze fell on Wang Lin. No one else could see him besides Wang Lin, whose eyes were black and white. He looked straight at him. Wang Lin secretly sighed and crushed the black flower in his hand into black powder. As the powder disappeared, it turned into specks of light invisible to mortals and landed on Daenyo's father's body. Daenyo's father immediately stopped feeling cold. He gratefully looked at Wang Lin. The current him finally understood that this person, who had been his neighbor for more than 20 years, was not a mortal. His soul floated in the air. He knelt down and kowtowed a few times toward Wang Lin. Then, he reluctantly looked at his wife and Daenyo as his whole body rose into the sky as if he was climbing a ladder and soon disappeared. "Dad, Mom, I saw Grandpa." At this moment, a little voice came from the corner. Daenyo's son, who was already 9, looked at the sky with a confused expression. However, no one believes the word of a kid. After seeing that no one was listening to him, he wrinkled his nose and stopped talking. Wang Lin regrettably looked at the surroundings. It was not possible to escape from the life and death cycle. He looked at Daenyo's father's body as he remembered the past 20 years. A strong young man who aged more and more every year in these past 20 years until he died. He took a deep breath and his gaze fell on Daenyo's mother. When he first met her, she was only in her early 30s. She was now over 50 years old. Over 20 years of time were carved on her body. Wang Lin's eyes moved again. This time, his gaze fell on Daenyo. Daenyo was once a clumsy kid that stuck his head into Wang Lin's shop. He was now a grown man. Not only was he married and had a kid, but he was even sending his parents to the grave. Just like a small tree that slowly grows over 20+ years and becomes a powerful tree that can withstand the weather. Thinking of this, Wang Lin's heart suddenly gained a hint of understanding. This feeling of understanding became deeper and deeper. In these 20+ years of turning into a mortal, Wang Lin felt for the first time the gate to comprehending the heavens. He didn't know when he left the ironworks shop. In a state of confusion, he sat before the stove in his shop and stared at the wall. His mind was blank. The only thing remaining was a sliver of divine sense. The interaction Wang Lin had with Daenyo's father, Daenyo's mother, and Daenyo flashed across his mind. The appearance of the three gradually changed throughout these 20+ years. Wang Lin felt an invisible energy surrounding them, causing Daenyo's parents to gradually grow old and Daenyo to gradually get older. Wang Lin felt something click in his mind. His eyes were emitting an unimaginable light. At this moment, he could feel his body suddenly begin to float. His body slowly floated higher and higher. As he floated into the air, he saw countless mortals, and around these mortals, he saw that mysterious energy again. He could see this energy around flowers and trees. It was around everything. This force came from the heavens and Wang Lin subconsciously wanted to find the source of this power. Gradually, he felt himself floating higher and higher and the capital city became smaller and smaller. Soon, the city disappeared and before him was a dirt-brown planet. Unfortunately, even now, he still hadn't found the source of that power. He could feel the power even in the stars. There was no place without it. Wang Lin's personality was very stubborn. If he wasn't stubborn, he wouldn't have spent 400 years just to go back to Zhao to get revenge on the Teng family. Besides stubbornness, he also had determination. He couldn't have gotten from the tiny cultivator he once was to the point he was at now if he wasn't determined. It was exactly this stubbornness and determination that made him want to find the source of this energy. The current him was completely relying on instinct to control his behavior. His body flew higher and higher, but just before he wandered too far from the brown planet, a giant, meteor-like rock flew by. On top of this giant rock sat a white-haired old man. When he passed Wang Lin, he exclaimed and revealed a very interested look. I can't believe that there is someone who can comprehend so deeply on this waste of a cultivation planet. But with your mere nascent soul cultivation, even if you're using this comprehension to reach the soul formation stage, it is best to not be too greedy. I'm afraid that this kind of heavenly Tao will take you millions of years to find its source. However, when that happens, your body will already have rotted away. Have you considered that? Wang Lin was startled, and his eyes were filled with confusion. The old man laughed. He carefully looked at Wang Lin and shouted, "My name is Tian Yunzi. Since we've met, I'll make you a deal. If you can get off this waste of a cultivation planet and come find me at planet Tianyun, then I'll let you be an honorary disciple for 100 years. With that, he pointed his right hand and Wang Lin's body shook. Wang Lin felt as if his body had gotten pushed by a powerful force. He was quickly pushed back down to the dirt-brown planet and back toward the Four Alliance area. The capital city turned from a tiny dot to the size of his nails and kept growing larger. He almost immediately returned to his shop inside the capital city. At this moment, Wang Lin suddenly opened his eyes. He was covered in sweat. Along with the sweat, there was also a strong, fishy stench. It had been a very long time since his body released this kind of stench. The last time was when he had reached the foundation establishment stage. At this moment, Wang Lin's eyes lit up. He took a deep breath, picked up a piece of wood, and carefully began to carve. This time, Wang Lin carved for a whole day and night. Finally, when he withdrew this finger, the carving of the cyan-robbed middle-aged man took shape. On the carving, there were hints of passing of time. He quietly looked at the carving. After a long time, he placed it on one of the shelves next to the carvings of the middle-aged man and old woman. After finishing all of that, he got up and went to the backyard. After he washed himself, he changed to clean clothes and returned to the shop. After comprehending the heavens this time, Wang Lin's cultivation level jumped from the mid-stage of nascent soul to the peak of the late stage of nascent soul. He was only a sliver away from the soul formation stage. It was just that when he thought of the scene from earlier, he couldn't help but be scared. If it wasn't for that old man named Tian Yunzi pushing him back, he would have really lost himself searching for that source. If that really happened, then the only result would his death. Comprehending the heavens was not a peaceful thing. It was filled with danger. This time, Wang Lin finally understood it. Although he still hadn't reached the soul formation stage, his understanding of the heavens had increased a lot. He believed that he was not far from the soul formation stage. He had now finished carving the statue of the middle-aged man with his domain. It was clear that his domain was imitating the life and death cycle. However, with Wang Lin's current perception, he could easily tell that the middle-aged man's path was only an imitation, far from the real life and death domain. That's because this life and death heavenly Tao was not something soul formation cultivators could comprehend. At this moment, there was a star map inside Wang Lin's mind. This star map was left behind by the old cultivator, Tian Yunzi. Inside the map was a planet several times larger than Suzaku. This was the old man Tian Yunzi's planet. It was just that it was impossible for the current Wang Lin to go there. He let out a sigh as he adjusted his mood and returned to being immortal. But in his mind, the feeling of comprehending the Tao of life and death was something he wouldn't forget in his lifetime. 10 years had passed since he last felt his domain. Wang Lin had lived on this street for more than 30 years. He had turned old. His hair was all white and there were deep wrinkles on his forehead. Da Nyo's mother died from grief 7 years ago. At this point, Da Nyo was managing the ironworks shop himself and, like his father before him, he supported his family, loved his wife, and constantly taught his growing son his trade so that his son may one day take over the shop. This scene was almost exactly the same as when Wang Lin first arrived, only the people had changed. But this scene didn't last long. 3 years ago, Da Nyo's son, named Xiao Nyo, caught the eyes of a wandering cultivator from the White Cloud sect and was taken back as a disciple. That year, the wandering cultivator also gave him a name, Wen Zhuo. Da Nyo was very proud that his own son was going to become an immortal. He would tell anyone he could find, and soon, everyone on the street knew. Wang Lin wasn't surprised at all about Wen Zhuo being taken by the wandering cultivator of the White Cloud sect. Wang Lin already noticed that Xiao Nyo had the body to cultivate when he was very little and his talent was several times better than Wang Lin's when Wang Lin started. Wang Lin did this because the only connection he had in the entire capital was with Da Nyo's family. Therefore, Wang Lin gave Xiao Nyo many pills to alter his body and this was the effect. As a result, Xiao Nyo's talent became even better, so it was not surprising that he caught the attention of the White Cloud sect cultivator. Although that cultivator was only at core formation stage, after Wang Lin observed him, he found that he was a kind person, very different from Wang Lin's own teacher, Sun Dazhu. Therefore, Wang Lin didn't interfere and just let it happen naturally. He had already done all he could to help. As for how Wen Zhuo will be in the future, it was no longer his concern. After Xiao Niu left, Da Niu hired a few workers, but in fact, this had broken his dad's rule. According to his dad, what they were selling was their skill. If someone else learned that skill, then weren't they picking up a stone to smash their own feet? But it seemed that Da Niu didn't listen to his dad's words. After he hired the workers, he stopped caring about the shop and instead returned to his old habits of watching Wang Lin carve every day. With Da Niu always around to serve Wang Lin, it made Wang Lin recall some old memories. Perhaps it was because Wang Lin watched Da Niu grow up, but ever since his mother died, he would come over to Wang Lin's place every New Year with his wife and food. Da Niu seemed to consider Wang Lin his own parent right now. Da Niu's wife, the tailor shop's shopkeeper's daughter, was a very smart woman. Seeing how her husband looked at Wang Lin, she also gradually began to treat Wang Lin like her own family's elders. As a result, in the final years of Wang Lin's life as a mortal in the capital city, he was able to feel the warmth of a family. This warmth was very strange to Wang Lin, but he didn't reject it. Xu Dao had also changed from a middle-aged man to an old man with some white in his hair. His current position had shot up from 10 years ago. He was now the chancellor for the king. This was not the king from back then, but the prince. After the prince became the king, his tributes didn't decrease, they only increased. Every year, he would personally come and kowtow toward Wang Lin, completely disregarding his position. Over these years, Wang Lin began to really admire the prince. After all, he was a king in the mortal world. To be able to lower his head like that takes a lot of determination. Perhaps it was because he had experienced a lot and realized that there were people that could kill him with just their finger and no one would care. One of the reasons he was so respectful to Wang Lin was to pull Wang Lin to his side so he could have a peaceful life. In this winter, it snowed heavily. In the 30-plus years Wang Lin had been here, he had never seen it snow this hard before. The snow covered the entire capital. The snow on rooftops and trees were as tall as a 4- or 5-year-old child. A lot of roofs collapsed under the pressure of all this snow. Some of the weaker people had frozen to death. Almost every morning, people would find 1 or 2 frozen bodies on the corners of the streets. This snow was very strange. Some of the people that had lived here for generations gathered in restaurants and talked about how there hadn't been snow this heavy for hundreds of years. The snow continued to fall and slowly covered the footprints made by the people that walked around. Soon, the footprint would be completely covered and be unnoticeable. This forced a lot of shops in the capital city to close down. The street Wang Lin was at was relatively remote, so after one day of snow, it was impossible to see anyone outside anymore. All of the people were hiding at home, sitting in front of their stoves to keep themselves warm as they waited for the snow to pass. This snow was indeed very strange. From the moment the snow began to fall, Wang Lin immediately noticed that in the snow, there was a trace of killing intent. This killing intent was very faint, but it has to be said that this snow covered the entire 4-sect alliance, so this killing intent was almost monstrous. The reason the temperature dropped so fast was due to this killing intent. This snow didn't come from the clouds, but appeared out of the thin air in the sky. How else could there be clouds big enough to cover the entire 4-sect alliance? On the 3rd day of this strange snow, the 9 pillars in the capital were split in half by lightning from the sky. The cultivators inside didn't even have time to escape as they were killed by the lightning. The moment this occurred, every single pillar like this in the other cities in the entire 4-sect alliance were destroyed by lightning from the sky. Shortly after, in addition to the snow falling from the sky, countless pieces of jade flew out from the east, south, west, and north corners of the country. Although these pieces of jade were very fast, the moment they met a foundation establishment cultivator, they would fall into their hands. One of those pieces of jade flew back to Wang Lin. After he waved his hand, even though it had already gone past him, it still flew directly into his hand. Wang Lin held the piece of jade in his hand and scanned it only to hear a gloomy voice say, "All cultivators inside the 4-sect alliance, prepare for war." The 4 sects, Water Ink Sect, White Cloud Sect, Greenwood Sect, and Black Soul Sect are calling all rogue cultivators to gather. Be absent at your own risk. Wang Lin pondered a little before crushing the jade in his hand. He disappeared from his shop and when he reappeared, he was in the sky above the capital city. After he appeared, his body suddenly moved and continued to fly up. Over 10,000 kilometers in the air, he found the source of the snow. Wang Lin stared at the sky for a while. He was eventually able to see through what was going on. He could see faint ripples of restrictions in the area. They seemed to hide the source of the snow. If it was any other type of technique, Wang Lin might have had trouble breaking through it, but as long as it was a restriction, he was not afraid. His right hand swiped over his eyes and a strange light shone from them. He stared at the air for a very long time and then his hand began to move. After half an hour, countless restrictions appeared around him. The illusionary circles landed in the air and white smoke appeared. It was as if ice was melting. Gradually, the empty sky became filled with white smoke. After the white smoke faded away, the truth was revealed. Wang Lin carefully looked at it and his expression immediately changed. He saw a large rift over 1,000 feet wide, in the sky above the capital. The snow endlessly came out of the rift. Wang Lin scanned the area with his divine sense and found that there were at least 100 of these restrictions within a 10,000 kilometer radius. This was only within 10,000 kilometers. According to Wang Lin's calculations, there must be countless rifts like this over the skies of the Four-Sect Alliance. What also surprised him was that this rift seemed to have the power to suck in divine sense. When his divine sense passed over it, he immediately noticed. Luckily, his divine sense was very powerful, so he was able to easily pull himself away. Wang Lin pondered for a while. Instead of acting rashly, he returned to his shop. During his descent, the entire world had turned white as it began to snow even harder. Wang Lin returned to the shop. He had a feeling that something bad was going to happen, and when he saw that rift, that feeling became even stronger. He pondered a little, then burst out laughing. This was the domain of the Four-Sect Alliance, so he didn't need to worry about it at all, as there will be cultivators more powerful than him that will deal with it. However, that rift in the sky still hovered over Wang Lin's heart like a dark cloud. Just at this moment, Wang Lin's expression changed as he looked at the door. After a little while, he heard knocking from outside. This knocking seemed to have a certain rhythm to it. The pause between every two knocks was exactly the same. This video will end here. Thank you for watching.